So we're going to study a little bit this morning. I think we've had, over the last 10 days, a sufficient number of sermons. And we should get back to our studying. The verses in the Torah reading and the Haftorahs are extraordinary. First, let me start with pointing out what's happening in the Torah reading. This is Moses' end, and he is desperate to deliver a message to the people of Israel. And his message is a summary of the entire book of Deuteronomy. And that is that if you go towards idolatry, meaning you reject the whole concept of the relationship between God and the people of Israel, what began with Abraham, the idea of one God, one creator, a covenant with that creator. 10 Commandments begins with that. I am the Lord your God, brought outside the land of Egypt, and you'll have no other gods before me. So everything is against idolatry. And Moses' great fear is that because the entire world was idolatrous, right? Abraham was, he was a Hebrew. So Hebrew is from the word Ivri, which is avar or over. So you're on the other side, right? You go over. So that we went over to the side of monotheism. We were on the other side of the entire world for over 1,000 years. The entire world was pagan for 1,000 years. So he was fearful that when you're overwhelmed by ideologies that surround you, and they're part of great cultures, right? Cultures that may have had great sickness in them, but they're still powerful cultures. Egypt, Babylonia, later on, the Persians, the Greeks. It wasn't until Christianity was born that the rest of the world started to adopt monotheism. So he said, I'm afraid that this Hebrew nation is going to fall back into the pattern of idolatry because that's how the world is, right? And we saw that, of course, with the story of Hanukkah, where the powerful leaders of Jerusalem said, we want to be like the Greeks. We don't want this idea of the Bible, which leaves us isolated in the world and we were a defeated nation at that point. That was our mistake. We separated from the rest of the world, and as a result, look what's happened to us. We're a small little country, Yehuda and Jerusalem, nothing much left of us, and look at this great Greek world that we could be part of. And so they tried and turned Jerusalem and Judah into a Greek polis, and then the Maccabees rebelled and reinstalled monotheism and Judaism. So it's a constant battle in which the Jewish people hold to an ideology, an idea that the rest of the world doesn't hold on to. We do have more monotheistic groups now, obviously Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, but the conflicts have remained, although obviously with Christianity they've changed completely, and we have a much stronger relationship and common enemies, I would say. That may be the reason that we have such a better relationship. So this is what Moses is worried about. But we have to, we shouldn't put it in the past and just say, well, we're not idolaters anymore. We don't know anybody who's out there worshiping idols. We don't know any pagans or polytheists. So what relevance is it? Well, the relevance is that idolatry doesn't necessarily mean worshiping another god. Idolatry means taking an ideology, because that's what polytheism is, it's a religious ideology, and putting it above Judaism, right? So anytime you have an ism, an ideology, in which you put ahead of Judaism, you're an idolater for the Torah, right? Because 10 Commandments, Judaism, the covenant has to be the highest, right? So throughout history, Jews have had a tendency to fall into isms that they thought could save the world. We know obviously that there were many Jews who believed communism was the answer and would save society. And that's what is our goal? Our goal as Jews is to save the world, right? To bring about the redemption of the world, tikkun olam, to repair that which is broken. So some Jews bought into communism as an ideology. Many have bought into secularism as an ideology. In recent times, many have bought into the idea that the world is divided into the oppressors and the oppressed, right? And we know the disaster that has brought upon the entire world. So anytime we buy into an ideology that conflicts with Judaism, with monotheism, in which we put God above all other ideologies, we are drifting into a pagan idea. This is what Moses feared. Our tendency as Jews, being a minority, to look at ideologies that surround us and think they provide a better answer to the plague which plagues society. So, Lori pointed out a verse in the Haftorah the cantor chanted, in which it talks about Hamasim. Hamasim has the word Hamas, right? And what is Hamasim? Hamasim are enemies, right? Me'ish Hamasim tatzilenu. From the people of Hamas, now they're not talking about the organization, but the organization Hamas. How did Hamas become Hamas? Why did they choose that word? Because it means violent, right? It means lawless. They chose, and they're saying to the world, we're a violent, lawless group. And somehow people are still trying to find, maybe they're not that violent, maybe they're not really that lawless. You can negotiate. And they tell you, no, we're violent, we're lawless, that's our name. Yet we try and deny the reality of who they are and what they are. So it says here in this Haftorah that God will save us from Hamas, from lawless men. So perhaps this Haftorah, being read this Shabbat, and we know that as of this Sunday there'll be an incredible group of people meeting in Egypt. And you always say, why Egypt? Because Egypt is always considered the leader of the Arab world. First of all, it's a very ancient nation. Obviously, it wasn't Arab way back when, but it's an ancient nation. Second of all, it is by far the absolute largest Arab country. And so it's always been the titular head. They always look to Egypt. So when you have a meeting taking place in Egypt, you understand that the Arabs are coming together. That's what Nasser tried to do. He almost did it. Thank God he failed. He tried to unite. Only Egypt has the ability to unite the Arab world, right? Nasser came close. In 1967, he had the Arab world united. The defeat led, of course, to the collapse of that unity. So they're going to Egypt. Who's going? Arab countries, America, Israeli delegation, and they're going there to try and bring an end to the war, which also means bring an end to Hamas rule. There is nobody involved in these negotiations who believes that Hamas can remain in power. So that's a very encouraging thing. But read this verse, right before this meeting on Sunday that could possibly lead to the release of the hostages and the end of the war and the removal of Hamas from Gaza is really fortuitous that this Haftorah was read today. So I also want to point out another one or two verses and lessons that we learn. In that poem that was the last words of Moses, he says the following, Zechor Yamot Olam, Binu Shnot Dovador. Remember the days of old, in other words, recall your history. Reflect upon the years of generations. Ask your father, and he will tell you. Your elders, and they will inform you. Now, we know that's a parallelism, because that's the poetic structure of the Bible. Ask your father, he will tell you. Your elders, and they will inform you. So you might think the elders are the same thing. Ask your parents, ask your elders. But the commentators do a very clever thing. They say, wait a second. It's a parallelism, except the second part is an add-on. It's a step up. It's not a perfect parallelism. Elders is not the same as parents. Who are the elders? The grandparents. All right? Ask your parents and ask your grandparents. And the rabbis point out, in the animal kingdom, there are many animals who acknowledge their parents, right? There's a connection between the animal that nurses, and even in the whole animal kingdom, there is a connection of the animal to the parent. Only human beings, no other animal in the animal kingdom, have a connection to the grandparents. which means only human beings have a sense of history. Only human beings turn and look upon the past in order to gain guidance for the future. Ideologies that attempt to break that connection of grandparent to parent to child. By the way, it doesn't mean they're going to follow them exactly. It means they're going to inquire, right? Sha'al, ask questions. You may not like their answers. You may come up with different answers, but you want to incorporate it. You want to learn. You have a sense that asking the previous generations about their experience and their advice will assist you in creating your new life or responding to life's difficulties. It's a dialogue. You don't have to come out of dialogue agreeing, but if you don't dialogue, then you lose your connection to the past. And then you're lost because you have no past to build on to create a future. And so, an ideology that tries and break the connection from parent to child, or even more from grandparent to child, is idolatrous. That's another form of idolatry. Remember Mao Zedong? What did he do? He understood, remember the Chinese were very, like the Japanese, very much worship their elders, right? That was extremely important in their culture. Mao Zedong tried and disconnect the children from the parents. Who became the new parent? The government. Who became the parent? Him. He was everybody's parent. To the point where you were supposed to turn your parents in if they weren't good communists, right? That was an idolatry, a form of idolatry that the Torah is speaking against. Any ideology that tries and turn the government into the parent, or the leader, in the case of Mao Zedong, into the parent of the child, is going to fail miserably, and is going to become clearly a dictatorship. And this is what Moses is railing against. Parent must be parents, and grandparents must be grandparents, and the society must respect that relationship. Obviously, if it gets abusive, the Torah already told us what to do when the parents get abusive. That's the whole story of the rebellious child, and the parents want to put the child to death, and say, well, okay, you can't do that. We'll protect the child. But that's the exception. Everything else is what? Teach your children. Passover. Teach your children. And what do your children have to do? They have to ask questions. That is enacting this verse. Ask your parents, ask your grandparents questions. And that's what Passover is based upon. That's what all of Jewish education is based upon. Asking the parents, asking the grandparents, and turning all the way back to the Torah and asking that tradition that Moses brought to us. One other verse of great importance, and another idea that has entered into the modern world that is very much against the Torah's idea of what's healthy. It says, you forgot the rock who bore you. You forgot the God who delivered you. Right? You forgot where you came from. You forgot the covenant. You forgot that God took you out of Egypt. You forgot that God gave you good instructions and a way to build a good society. And that was your choice. You chose to forget. You chose not to teach it, or you chose to drift from it. And Moses says, if you do that, you are fully responsible for the repercussions of that abandonment of your tradition and how you're going to break down your society and be unprepared to sustain your security and your country. So the first temple is destroyed because of idolatry, according to Jeremiah, Ezekiel, right? Literal idolatry, turning away from the one God. The second temple is not because of idolatry. Ironically, by the way, idolatry was eliminated in the exile, never in the land of Israel. It wasn't until we went into Babylonia in exile that we finally got rid of idolatry. By the rabbinic period, it's not even an issue. The new issue was worshiping Greek culture, Roman culture. That was the new idolatry, but false gods, that was abandoned. What's happening here is that Moses saying, you are responsible. You made a choice, free will, to abandon the Torah. And the result is you now have a society that's not sustainable because you're at each other's throats. You have no common ground. You can't agree on the basic elements that make you a society. You can't agree on the basic history and what direction you're going. You're at each other's throats, and then your enemy comes in and you're unprepared, right? Which is something we always fear. We fear it in our country. We fear it in Israel. When a society can't even find any common ground to dialogue, and when instead of dialogue, they shoot, right? That's what scares us. And in Israel, we're scared that they're not willing to dialogue about some of the most critical issues facing the country. And when the war is over, we hope that they'll learn from those lessons and really begin the dialogue. So why is this a contradiction to Judaism? Why is part of modern culture a contradiction? Because in many ideas in psychology and many ideas in terms of treating those who are lawbreakers, who are lawless, who commit crimes of violence, is instead of saying you made a choice and therefore you're responsible and you will have to suffer the consequences, very often modern psychology, they say there is no free will, you're programmed. That's your brain, right? You couldn't choose to do otherwise. Why? Because of the way you were raised. The way you were raised forced you into this direction, which means you're not at fault, we're at fault, right? Or your psychology is such that you can't avoid doing this. Therefore, you bear no responsibility. And the Torah says that doesn't exist, right? It may exist if there's a profound illness, obviously, but that doesn't exist. You are responsible. There is free will. You do make choices. You chose to forget the God who delivered you, right? You chose to reject the ethics of the Torah. You chose to go in a different direction. You chose to disobey the laws of your own country. And therefore, Moses is saying, there are severe consequences. Because if there are not severe consequences, you'll lose your country. Because lawlessness will take over and destroy your society. You can't allow people to act in a lawless way without consequences. This denial of the idea of freedom and choice, that psychologically we really are programmed to act in a certain way and therefore not really responsible for our actions, goes completely against what the Torah is saying, what Moses is saying. Remember Flip Wilson? I guess dating us, right? What does Flip Wilson say? The devil made me do it, right? Of course, for him, it was a joke. That was his line. He absolutely meant the opposite, obviously. He was trying to make a point in his humorous way. Well, the devil made me do it became modern psychology, right? The devil became your psyche, and your psyche made you do it. Not because you chose to do it, you had no choice. This is what you're programmed to do. There's no devil in Judaism, right? There is no lack of free will, except in people who have profound illness that actually does remove their ability to think in a logical or rational manner. But that's a very tiny part of the population. And so what Moses is saying now is to the Jewish people, to the Hebrew people, as he's leaving them, you're totally responsible for your behavior. And if you reject this monotheistic idea of Torah law, of the one God, of the one morality and one ethic that we're all bound by, you make that choice, you're going to destroy your society. And therefore, he said, you're going to get thrown off your land. Not because you're being punished, but because you can't sustain yourself in your land because you're no longer a unified nation, you don't have a clear purpose, and your enemies, who will always outnumber you, will be able to overwhelm you. And so Moses leaves excellent instruction not only for the Jewish people, but for all of humanity. And that is, consult with your parents and your grandparents in the past. Dialogue, ask questions, but most of all, understand what your basic morality, ethic, and ideology is. Hold on to it, and those who go against it and try and destroy the lawfulness in your country, who want to destroy justice, they are the ones that endanger your community more than anyone else. So it's very good advice, and of course we hope that this conference on Sunday will lead to the release of the hostages, and we're getting very close to October 7th, so maybe it will be on the second anniversary, we'll finally be able to bring them home. Ken Yiratzon, may this be God's will.
You know, Rabbi, you made me think when you mentioned, I would take a minute, when you mentioned the idea that in animal kingdom, there is loyalty only to one generation, correct? It's only human that can think bigger. And this reminded me the story about a rabbi who got married not old, but inappropriate for a rabbi at the age of 50. So he became a grandparent at the age of 80. But he was a very pious person, so a colleague, the day of the bris of his grandkid, come to the rabbi and say, today you became a mensch. Because today you can care of another generation. Till then you were like the rest of the animals, one generation. Today you become a mensch. And something else I learned about that a while ago, how do you say grandkid in Yiddish? Einikl. Einikl, yes? Einikl, it's not Hebrew, and Einikl is not German. So apparently, it comes from the following. Remember the burning bush? When they describe, they say, Ve'asne enenu kal, einikl, enenu kal. When the fire never stops, then it's because you have an einikl. Enenu kal, einikl. That is good, huh? That's really good. So thank you for refreshing me that memory with the idea of animal kingdom, one generation. Mensch and fire is more than one generation.